Welcome to the Dev Banner. This is Eric Smith. In this how-to episode is all about struct tags. And if you've gone and seen episode 2, I've talked about structs, but I purposely left off struct tags because I really wasn't using them. So I wanted to make this episode, how-to episode, of learning how to do struct tags. So as you can see, I have this struct, this user struct, and these are the fields that are in it: ID, first name, last name, email, active, age, and created at. These little things are called struct tags, and what they do is they give some more definition to your field elements per field, per kind of type. So in this case, I have one on ID, I have one called DB and one called JSON. And what that helps you know is what process or what kind of operation goes on that struct tag for that field. And I'll explain that. These other ones have one called CSV. And by default, there's a lot of third-party libraries, or in this case, the JSON is in the standard package, uses this struct tag to help it with its functionality and processing when it deals with the struct and its field. And so you'll see that you do this DB, JSON, or CSV, colon, no commas, just a space, and then this, what's in quotes, is what case you want to deal with the field when it deals with it. And so we'll go over that. So what I've done is I created a really quick. Now, before I go on to the program, let's go over to the DB. All this is I've got a couple of functions that I'm just doing some straight up SQL. I have a table in Postgres that I'm saving data to, and there's a save DB, read DB. I have a read from DB error I wanted to show you, a kind of a gotcha when we get to that point. And I use a library called, this is the library to deal with Postgres, but come in here, there's a library called this JMoron SQL X that I use, and it has some helper functions and stuff like that in it. So I'll get to that in a minute. So let's go to the JSON. JSON's pretty simple. I just have a into JSON string from JSON string. I wanted to break these out, even though you'd probably do this in line, because it's really a one-liner plus an error code check. And then I'm actually printing. I'm printing the what you get out of the JSON, whether it's a string or an object or a struct. And so I just wanted to break that out just so it's easier to see. And then the CSV, I'll get to that, but it's mostly dealing with the struct tag in a package called reflect, and that's a standard package. And so the struct has that information, and when it gets instantiated, it holds in memory those struct tags, and you can go reflect into that struct and get more information. So we'll go over that in a second. And then once again, back to this user, I have a utility function that's just, I'm reading from the command line and grabbing grabbing whatever I get from the command line after I press enter. The connection is just talking to Postgres and making a connection. So that's pretty much the whole file or the whole program except for the main function. So line by line, I'm just getting a connection. I'm going to create a user, and I'm going to do this ask for new, and all that does is, so if I go ahead and run this, all that does is it asks me for information to put into a user. So we're going to do Ronald and Weasley. That's the first. We're going to give him a name, and I spelled Ronald, like Roland. Anyway, so is he active? Yes. Age, I'm not doing any error checking on this. I'm not doing any validation. He's 17. So at that point, I wanted to show you that I'm reading, and I probably could have done this a little later, but so I've done this and I saved to the database. So I did all of this stuff right here in this function, and then I saved it. You don't see that because it saved good. It saved well. And then what I did is I knew that I had a number one record, and so I take this user and we come back to the database. So we're going to look at this read from database error. And I have this user as a receiver on this method. And all I'm doing is I'm selecting the first name, last name, email, active, age, created at, and updated. Now you're saying, well, there was no updated. And you're right, there was no updated. And that's the error. Is when this is the gotcha. So what this library does, this SQLX, is I go get a record, and it's giving me, the first parameter is its destination, what you're going to fill it in with, and that's an interface, a blank interface. So anything can go to there. So as long as it's a struct, it's going to probably handle it right, but it uses the struct tags. It uses the struct tags in here to find the row, the record column, and then it puts the data into the struct. So it does that for you automatically. Problem is it doesn't have anything to deal with this updated at, and so that's your gotcha. Is you'll run into that and you'll get this missing destination name at this updated at, and it's a pretty good message. Kind of tells you right out the bat that you're missing that, and so it printed this error. So I just wanted to show you that, and then I'm just now waiting to do that. So I press enter. And what's this going to do is I'm going to take this person, which was Ronald Weasley, and I'm going to convert him into a JSON string. So I'm going to press enter, and here's a JSON string. Now, I pre-printed that JSON string, which is called Marshall indent, and all it takes is what your any is still like an interface. You prefix, meaning that what's your first indent here, and then what's the indent for every time it needs to indent in the JSON. So that's what these other two arguments into this function. And then I just go ahead and print out. And so this point, this gives you back a byte array. And so I'm just printing it, and that's what you get. So the next thing that I wanted to show you is now we're going to create a new user, And I'm going to take what I just did, making this JSON, and I'm going to put it to a new user. And that's this JSON user copy. And then I'm going to check. I'm using the reflect package. Again, I'm going to check. And what it does is it goes through each struct and says, and it will do a deep struct. So if it's arrays or even maps or whatever, it will go down and you know, make sure that everything is correct. Now, just a warning, that can be really frustrating if you have a really large struct. So I would kind of stay away from the deep equal, but I'm using it here just to show you that. And if everything works out, it will say that JSON users are the same. So I'm gonna press enter, and my little JSON, from string, I just print it out, and I'm printing if you do this %+v, if it's a struct, it will give you, what's the word? It prints everything for you, whether it's a map or an array or in this case a struct. It'll print the key value set for you. So that's what that line is. And then it says JSON users the same. So that looks great. Now we're going to go and I'm going to read everything from the database. And it's done. I don't have anything output, but so let's look at that. So I grabbed everything from the database, and that read all from the database is I just grabbed everything. I don't have a where clause or anything, and I'm doing a select. Instead of a get, it's a select. So the normal SQL DB package that comes from Go, you'd have to scan it and then go over every record and then, you know, take a value and put it into the value. And this select and the get does that for you with the SQL X. I really like the library. I've been using it for years. It's just a great package, and it just makes things so much simpler. And so that's what this thing does. And so I did that, and I have a bunch of users, and then I call my CSV, build my CSV header. Now the header only needs just a struct to determine what the fields are to read. And what it does is, coming back to the users, what it does is it reads all of these fields on this struct, you know, and says, okay, these are the fields that I'm dealing with. And so you'll see that I have these uppercase. I put everything as uppercase instead of snake case down here, or either JSON or and as you see, that happened, right? They got converted, even though the name. And I'll come back to some getchas and some gotchas on the JSON part. But so coming back to the CSV, I'm building this header, and I just need an interface. I need a struct interface. And I'm not going to go into this too detail. The reflect package is pretty powerful. I think a lot of people say that there's some performance penalty using it, but it gets used quite a bit. And even though you think it's not being used, it gets used. The JSON package uses it. That SQL X package uses it. I'm using it here. And so basically what it does is it reads, it does this type of, gets the type of the struct, which is a user. And then it makes sure that it is a struct, which is that T kind. And then I go through the fields and I look up the tag, the struct tag. And if it's a CSV, then I append that value, I append this value into an array of headers. And then I'm done. Then I'm just I wrote it that it brings back you an array of strings. You could do these lines, and it gives you just a byte array to deal with. Because most of the time, CSV, you're going to go to a file, and you need the byte array to do that. But so I'm just putting the commas between them because it's a comma separated, and then I'm putting a new line on it. Then I'm going actually through the list of users, and I'm building the CSV line, and it's about the same. I'm making sure that it's a struct, and I'm making sure that they have a CSV, and then I'm doing this reflect value, and I'm getting the field value out of that struct, and I'm appending it. So it's pretty simple. It's a lot of redirects and using the functions that are in the reflect, but it works out pretty well. And I'm using the struct tags to do that for me. So once again, this is very generic, has nothing to do with a user, or if I made another struct called customer or whatever, it just handles it. And then I'm writing it out to a file, and boom. And so that's where this is. And as you see, I had a bunch of other rows, and I can bring that over to you and select user tut, just to prove that it's in the database. And so there's my Ron Weasley, and so you got the first name, last name, email, active, and age, because that's what I did. And let's see. So we're going to come back to this, and so that's struct tags. That's how it works. So some of the gitches and some of the gotchas on this. Let's say that you don't want to worry about input or output it on the JSON, mostly an output. If you do that, or if you, let's just say that I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, so let's start over, and I'm going to run the program again, and we're going to, let's do, Luke Skywalker. And yes, he's active, and he's 40. And that's fine, we're expecting that. So here's the gotcha. If I don't have a JSON, it will actually use the field, but use the field name, which is a capital ID. And I'm gonna go through this, and it's gonna recreate everything. But if you're like, well, I don't want anything at all, then this is the gotcha. You put a dash through it. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's run this again, and I don't know Gandalf's last name, so we're just going to go wizard. See my pattern here. Yes, and he's like 5,000 years old. And if you just put a dash in there, at least the outputs are going to say, oh, I'm not going to deal with you at all. CSVs, if I was to change one of these, then you would see that reflected in the at least the header part. And but those are struct tags. And so, as I said, that JSON is used quite a bit through the JSON encoding/JSON package. At least my package in the database gets used a lot. And just one quick thing, I had this other saved name, or saved into DB. You can see that I kind of did this query, and I pushed everything. Well, what's really nice is that they have this named query that's through this SQLX library, and all you do is give it the struct, and then you supply what you think that, or what the struct tags are on the DB, and it will line it up for you and build that for you. So it's just another example of, I think what's really great is the struct tags, and I've used them for other things to help me, just give more context and more data to your struct fields. So that's struct tags. Thanks for joining. See you next time. Please subscribe to the channel and make sure notifications are turned on.